Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers, obviously, for including this paper, and thank you for you guys for all being here. Given not only do you have lots of distractions with your time, but you also have an amazing set of other presentations. So I really appreciate the people in the room being here. Given I have 5 minutes, no time on the introduction, or at least this bit of the introduction, except to just flag that given I'm the IMF, the normal disclaimer applies. Okay. So this paper started with a very simple observation. That observation is that firms frequently undertake costly search in order to identify new suppliers. And indeed, we know from research from some of the people even in this room that both the number and quality of those suppliers is a key determinant of firm success. Now, in this context where lots of firms are simultaneously searching at the same time, we know that there are a couple of forces at play which might be quite relevant for us. The first, is congestion. So that's if one firm's search crowds out another firm's probability of making a match, and you can maybe think why that might be true. But in addition to that kind of congestion force which is out there, there's also potentially a positive spillover. And that positive spillover will occur if one firm's search increases the probability of another firm making a match, perhaps because that firm generates some information in that search process which spills over to other firms. And so in this paper, one thing that I begin to kind of argue is that actually which of these externalities is likely to be important depends on the size and the kind of scalability of the suppliers which are going to be matched with. And so in particular, the key distinction I'm going to be making is to think about small domestic suppliers. And so the setting for this paper is Uganda, where you can imagine firms are credit constrained, they're small, they have limited access to credit. And so actually, if they make a match with 2 buyers in the same period, maybe they actually can't fulfill that match with both buyers because of the fact that they just simply can't scale up. By contrast, if you consider a large foreign firm who's exporting to Uganda, actually this firm has good access to credit markets. It has maybe a flexible labor force. It maybe has different production lines. And so if it makes multiple matches in the same period, actually that firm has a much larger ability to scale up. And so, as you kind of already may perhaps imagining, we know that there are lots of benefits from opening to international trade. What I'm going to be arguing in this paper is that this kind of search externality channel is a new mechanism for a gain from trade, moving from this kind of congested domestic market where search is congested into this kind of positive externality international market where I'm able to match with firms which are kind of larger scale. Okay, so I hope that first slide gives you some idea of the kind of basic model mechanism. Let me tell you briefly about the setting. So Uganda is a wonderful country. We've already heard a bit about it today. We've already heard about search in Uganda. One of the reasons for me, though, 3 reasons for me that Uganda is a particularly interesting place. The first is that it has amazing data. And so I'm going to be using Ugandan government tax administration data. And so in particular, there's kind of 3 main data sets. And with the combination of these data sets, I have a kind of near universe of formal firm-to-firm transactions. And so the first of these data sets is a VAT transactions data set. And so that allows me to observe not only the firm buying, but also the firm that they've purchased from and the unique tax identifier of both of these firms. That's then matched to customs data, which again is buyer-supplier matched. So I can observe the firm in Uganda, but also the name of the firm in the kind of foreign country selling to the firm in Uganda. And then more traditional kind of firm tax registration and balance sheet information. So it's really rich kind of combination of data, which I then combine and use or utilize a particular natural experiment, which is a large fall in international trade costs driven by a series of policy changes at the East African community level, which led to 25% fall in kind of observed trade costs. And so this is a natural policy experiment which I'm able to exploit to kind of think about or quantify the model mechanism that I have in mind. Finally, the 3rd reason I think Uganda is a good place to consider this is that firms in Uganda are likely to be in a world in which search costs exist. And one way I'm able to kind of argue that is the Ugandan government believes that's also the case. And so in 2018, as part of their main policy agenda setting conference, they set reducing search costs by 25% as one of their 3 main targets for trade. And so a series of policies they're going to implement. And so using the kind of this study, I'm able to think about where those policies can be targeted best in order to have the kind of biggest bang for the buck. So in this paper, I do 4 things. Firstly, I propose this new, or formalize indeed, this new search mechanism for a gain from trade via a simple descriptive model. Next, I utilize this novel transaction level data to provide some initial kind of reduced form evidence consistent with there being different externalities between the domestic and international markets in terms of these search effects. Third, I build that simple model into a full quantitative model of firm-to-firm search and matching, which is able to be estimated on the data. And finally, I run two main counterfactual exercises in order to try and get at these search externality channels. And so the first of these is to estimate the welfare gain from trade from this 2011 fall in international trade costs, and then to shut down the search externality channel, which allows me to observe how much additional gain from trade is coming from this new channel that I propose. The second counterfactual exercise is to consider how lowering search costs, indeed lowering like domestic versus international search costs, will also lead to a welfare gain and how the government can best target those search costs towards the kind of the most effective sectors. So key findings, final slide. First of all, I show some reduced form and structural evidence consistent with search externalities differing between the domestic and international markets. In particular, I find a 1% increase in foreign supplier search will increase matches by 1.26%, so increasing returns to scale in search in the international market. However, a 1% increase in domestic supplier search will increase matches by only 0.96%, so decreasing returns to scale in the domestic market. Second, through the simulations of the quantitative model and the counterfactual exercises, I'm able to observe that there'll be a 3.7% increase in welfare from the 25% reduction in international trade costs. And 12% of that welfare gain is due to this search externality channel that I propose in the paper. And secondly, if we lower search costs by 25%, that will lead to a between 2 and 4% increase in consumer welfare, depending on where those search costs are targeted. In particular, if you reduce international search costs, it will have a bigger improvement in welfare because it will increase search in this positive externality search environment. Finally, this gives us a rationale for policy intervention. Indeed, we already know many reasons why international trade can be beneficial for both consumers and firms, but this is one additional channel via the alleviation of congestion in the domestic market and this more efficient search. Secondly, this gives us a rationale for policies targeted at lowering search costs. In particular, some of the interventions that we saw in Meredith Stark's presentation can be very effective at increasing consumer welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We've less than 5 minutes for a quick Q&A, so kindly requesting you all to keep it brief. Thank you.
So, John, I know this is like an incredibly brief summary, but could you elaborate just a tiny bit on? I think I'm understanding the potential congestion, so why there might be sort of crowd out of other partners in search. I'm not quite wrapping my head around the positive externality. So suppose there's no crowd out and the foreign suppliers can fully expand to meet new matches demand. What's the externality from that?
So the externality is simply that. So if I'm a firm in Uganda and I'm looking for a foreign supplier, say for packaging products, it may be the case that when I undertake that search, I find that firm, and then maybe that provides some kind of general information, which I then pass on to other firms. And indeed, in some of the kind of evidence I find is that firms located very close to one another tend to adopt the same set of suppliers. So if I adopt a supplier in a particular period, that increases the probability that you adopt that supplier in the next period. And so in that sense, my search is kind of reducing the cost or increasing the probability of you making a match, but I don't internalize that fact. So that's where the kind of externality comes in.
Got it. Thank you.
Sorry, if I can, so just a clarification question. How can you get to this 25% reduction in trade costs? Is an estimate? It's something that you get in your model or what?
As in, how do where do I get to the 25%?
Yeah, the number, yeah, the figure, 25%, yeah.
So this is some kind of observed trade costs from the World Bank. They have some metric of how much it costs to import a container of goods into Uganda. And so that number falls in 2011 by 25%.
Okay, thank you.
Tuman? I think maybe you're on mute.
Oh, my mic is not working today. Do you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, you're back.
Yeah. How do you distinguish between like a positive externality from dealing with a larger company from abroad and a larger company just being able to market better and sort of maybe targeting all those packaging firms in one area that you just described?
Yep. So I think that possibly could be the case. In my kind of empirical design, one thing I'm going to be able to do is look at very closely located firms. So even within the same building. And so one thing that you can see is that this foreign packaging firm, if it manages to make a match with someone in the same building, that increases the probability of that firm adding that supplier. Firms in the same building adding that same supplier. And that effect declines over space quite rapidly. So a good explanation for that is simply that I'm meeting that guy in the corridor and he's telling me about the kind of packaging supplier. So that's the way that I'm trying to get at that effect.
I just have a really quick branding comment. So you in your externalities, you were calling the negative ones congestion. And then I was thinking maybe you could brand the other one as a contagion externality because you were just calling it good or something. And I thought it would be nice to have a term for it.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know. Do you observe the foreign or domestic suppliers search in the data, or is it a device in your model that generates this, or how do you observe that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't observe search directly, so everything is going to have to be inferred from the kind of matches that we see. And so obviously the best case scenario that you'd have some information about exactly where these firms are searching. What I observe is the kind of realization of those matches. And so I'm going to use the model to try and back out what the underlying search behavior is. It's kind of hard to go into the full detail given it. I have 2 seconds left, but thank you. It's a good question. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John.